I'm going to talk about why Voidstaff Fiendish Codex is almost always better on Veigar than a Deathcap after your GOP. The reason I'm talking about this is yesterday I got flamed by this player who's apparently very popular and told that I should have built a Deathcap when I bought these items. And so I'm going to go into Practice Tool and show you why these are better. And I'm going to take note of how many stacks I have. It's 142. And the enemy team's health and MR. You can see for yourself on the bottom left if you want to cross-check me. Now we're in Practice Tool and I set up 4 target dummies to represent 4 of the champions on the enemy team. I omitted Lux for reasons that you'll see in a minute, but this one represents Gangplank. It has 2300 health and 90 MR and armor. And one note is that you can only change the health in intervals of 100 and the MR in intervals of 10. So for this experiment, I rounded the MR down, which would favor Deathcap as much as possible. And I rounded the health to the nearest 100. And this is Echo with 1900 health and 70 MR, Lilia with 1500 health and 40 MR, and Twitch with 30 MR. He actually had 35 and 1500 health. And in my inventory, I have GLP, the Deathcap I was recommended, and some AP items to account for how many stacks I had plus Doran's Ring. As time goes on and I hit these dummies more and more, I'll sell the Blasting Wand for an Amp Tome so that I can stay accurate with the amount of AP I have. So we're going to test a full combo damage on GP with the Deathcap build. So it does that much. Now I'm going to skip in between because I have to wait for Electrocute to come back up. So now the damage on Echo. It kills. So I actually made a mistake before. Lilia had 1566 health, and so I've rounded it to 1600 instead of 1500. So we're going to see the combo on Lilia. Since the full combo killed Echo, we're only going to use WQ to see how much damage that does. And it kills. And if it kills Lilia, then clearly it's going to kill Twitch or Lux without their shields. But for the sake of completeness. So now I've stacked a bit and bought 2 needlessly large rods to account for my AP to make it the same as before. And I have a Voidstaff and Fiendish Codex, which I bought that game, which costs about the same as a Deathcap. I'm going to see how much damage it does. And don't worry, I'll show at the end a side-by-side comparison. So we're going to start with GP. It does about that much damage. Now we're going to move on to the Echo. It kills. And now the Twitch or the Lux. So now I'm going to talk about the results. The only case where Deathcap has a significant advantage over Voidstaff is hitting your half combo, so your combo without your ultimate, on Lilia, where she just barely dies if you build a Deathcap, and just barely lives if you have a Voidstaff. But note that this difference is super, super close. It's something that like an extra point in Dark Matter, which people very frequently take for the wave clear, or a few more stacks or an Amp Tome would account for. So it's just like a very finite point in this game where she would live from it. 2, it's assuming that she starts at full HP, which is very unlikely, considering that she's melee and a jungler who's probably taken some amount of damage before running into the fight. And C, it's assuming that nobody else is hitting her, which in a team fight is kind of unlikely given that she's melee. And finally, even if she didn't die, even if all of these things went wrong, even if she didn't die, it's not like she's going to be able to significantly contribute to a fight anymore after being chunked to 100 HP. Next are a few more considerations that make Voidstaff better than Deathcap. First, the components are cheaper of Voidstaff, so your power curve is smoother. Instead of having to wait and save your gold to buy a needlessly large rod, you can spend your gold as you get it and get an Amplifying Tome and a Blasting Wand. And then the entire item is cheaper, so buying a Voidstaff will make you have enough damage to kill people far earlier than Deathcap will. And this can determine a lot of dragon fights, and a lot of games in the current meta are determined by how the early game goes. So you really want to be able to get an item quickly out of GLP. And then Voidstaff lets you afford a Fiendish Codex, and that's going to give you CDR for more stacks. And your Voidstaff actually scales with levels in W and R. M-Pen increases the amount of the effectiveness of the base damage of your spells in a way that Deathcap can't. And so once you start getting the third point in your R, or points in your W, if you put 2 points in your W, Voidstaff is more useful in amplifying those base damages than Deathcap is. And then one advantage of Deathcap is it would make you do more damage to monsters and minions, but the wave clear pattern is actually the same until you have like both of them and your W one-shots melees. Having a Voidstaff versus having a Deathcap, your wave clear is the same. And if you have as I said, if you have the Fiendish Codex, your wave clear is actually faster with the Voidstaff because you get through 2 rotations of your spells faster. And finally, and maybe the most important thing, is that if you build a Voidstaff, it's still safe if the enemy pivots to MR. If you start building a Deathcap, it's a huge investment. You have to buy a needlessly large rod, and now you're sunk into that build. You have to get the Deathcap. And if someone on the other team buys a Negatron Cloak, there's not a lot you can do about it. And they suddenly become very hard to kill when a Voidstaff would have made it a lot easier to kill. So it's safer to build a Voidstaff because it defends against the enemy team itemizing against you, versus building a Deathcap is super risky and the other team can just pick up a Negatron Cloak for 720 gold and you're never going to kill them. Finally, if you don't accept what I have to say about things, there's the best Veigar player in NA right now, Duo King 1, who occupies rank 43, 15, and has the GM Smurf. So I think he's better than both me and the person I was arguing with, especially when it comes to Veigar. If you go through his match history, you'll be hard-pressed to find a single game where he goes Voidstaff, or he goes Deathcap and then Voidstaff. There's one game where he built a Deathcap before building a Voidstaff. He actually didn't finish a Voidstaff because he went last chapter Majai's Deathcap.